When Judge Harrison Matthews summoned Sarah Bennett to his courtroom that morning, he believed he'd found the perfect victim, a modest English teacher who had dared to challenge his authority in public. He intended to crush her spirit, destroy her reputation, and send a message to anyone else who might question his judgment. However, as Sarah stood quietly before him in her navy blazer, clutching her leather portfolio, the judge remained blissfully unaware that he had just orchestrated his own downfall. Sarah Bennett adjusted her reading glasses as she wrote symbolism in American literature across the whiteboard of room 214. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow on the faces of her advanced placement students. This marked her 12th year teaching at Lincoln High School, and despite the occasional challenges, she cherished every moment. "Miss Bennett," called Thomas from the back row. "Why do we have to analyze every little detail? Can't we sometimes just enjoy the story?" Sarah smiled, setting down her marker. "That's actually an excellent question, Thomas. Literature isn't merely entertainment. It's a mirror reflecting justice, truth, and the human condition. The deeper we look, the more we understand not just the story, but the world around us." The bell rang, and students began gathering their belongings. Sarah noticed the school newspaper abandoned on a desk, its headline catching her eye. "Local judge's controversial decision redirects education funds." A frown creased her forehead as she recalled the community meeting last month where she had spoken out against Judge Harrison Matthews' ruling, a decision that had diverted promised educational funds to a questionable private development project. Later that afternoon in the teacher's lounge, her colleague Rebecca approached her with concern. "I heard you really stirred things up at that town hall meeting," Rebecca said, lowering her voice. Sarah shook her head. "I simply stated the facts. What Judge Matthews did was technically legal, but morally reprehensible. Those funds were earmarked for education." "Well, you certainly caught some powerful people's attention," Rebecca warned. "Matthews has connections throughout this county." "I'm just a high school literature teacher expressing my opinion," Sarah replied, gathering her papers. "What's he going to do? Sue me for speaking the truth unknown to most at Lincoln High?" Sarah Bennett held a secret that would prove crucial in the days ahead. Before discovering her passion for teaching, she had graduated with highest honors from Columbia Law School. She had never practiced professionally, having realized during her internships that courtroom battles weren't her calling. Instead, she channeled her passion for justice into literature and teaching critical thinking to young minds. That evening, Sarah's mind drifted to her grandfather, William Bennett, a small-town attorney who had spent his career defending those without a voice. He had taught her that understanding the law meant protecting the vulnerable, not exploiting power. The worn volumes of his law books now lined her study shelves, silent witnesses to a path not taken. In her cozy two-bedroom home, Sarah kicked off her heels and settled in for an evening of grading essays. The answering machine blinked with a message. "Miss Bennett, this is the clerk from Municipal Court. You are being summoned regarding your traffic violation from last month. Judge Matthews will be presiding. Please appear this Friday at 9:00 a.m., Sarah frowned. Traffic violation? She had received a minor citation for a rolling stop 3 weeks ago, but had promptly paid the fine online. There should be nothing requiring a court appearance. A knot of unease formed in her stomach as she remembered the judge's icy stare at the town hall meeting. His eyes locked on her throughout her speech. "This is peculiar," she murmured, opening her laptop to verify the payment confirmation. Little did she know, this was merely the opening move in Judge Matthews' carefully orchestrated revenge. Judge Harrison Matthews' chambers exuded intimidation by design. Mahogany bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes, certificates of distinction displayed in ornate frames, and a massive desk that dwarfed any visitor. He adjusted his silk tie while reviewing Sarah Bennett's file, a thin smile playing across his otherwise stern features. "Gregory," he called to his clerk, "bring me everything you have on this teacher. Sarah Bennett. Gregory nodded nervously. He'd worked for Judge Matthews long enough to recognize when the man had targeted someone. The traffic violation summons was sent as you requested, Your Honor. Excellent. Matthews leaned back in his chair, fingers forming a steeple beneath his chin. This woman thinks she can stand up in a public forum and question my judgment, my reputation. I sentenced hardened criminals who showed more respect. The clerk shifted uncomfortably. Sir, it was merely a community meeting. Freedom of speech and all. Matthew's eyes flashed dangerously. It's not what she said, Gregory. It's how she said it. Citing legal precedents, questioning the statutory interpretation. She made me look incompetent in front of the entire town council. He slammed the file shut. Who does this high school teacher think she is? What truly bothered Judge Matthews wasn't just Sarah's criticism, but the precision with which she had delivered it. Most citizens who spoke at public comments delivered emotional tirades, easily dismissed. But Sarah had been different, measured, citing relevant case law, pointing out procedural inconsistencies. It was almost as if, find out everything about her education, past positions, connections, everything, he ordered. Later that afternoon, Gregory returned with a surprisingly thin folder. Not much to report, sir. She's been teaching literature at Lincoln for 12 years, lives alone, pays her taxes punctually. No criminal record. He hesitated before adding, she did graduate from Columbia Law School 16 years ago, top of her class, actually, but never took the bar exam. Matthew's eyebrows shot up. A law school graduate. He processed this information, then smiled slowly. Fascinating. She knows just enough to be dangerous, but not enough to defend herself properly in court. He turned to the window, watching storm clouds gather outside. Gregory, modify the summons. Change it from the paid traffic violation to failure to appear for a scheduled court hearing. Add a contempt charge. Gregory blanched. But sir, that would be. The system allows judges discretion for a reason, Gregory. Matthews cut him off. Consider it a lesson in respect for our little teacher. She'll face either a substantial fine or community service. Nothing too severe, just enough to teach her to mind her own business. And perhaps a permanent mark on her record about respecting the bench. The clerk hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Judge Matthews had powerful connections throughout the judicial system. Few dared challenge him, even when his methods crossed ethical boundaries. Most defendants simply paid whatever fines he imposed rather than fight a system where he held all the cards. That evening, Judge Matthews attended a private dinner with prominent community leaders, including the superintendent of schools. Between courses, he casually mentioned his concerns about politically active teachers undermining community institutions. Specifically, he said, swirling his brandy, I'm troubled by this Sarah Bennett situation. Such behavior sets a dangerous precedent for students, don't you think? The superintendent nodded nervously, well aware of the judge's influence over school district funding. I'll look into it immediately. Matthews smiled benevolently. I'm sure it's nothing serious, but teachers should focus on teaching, not criticizing the judiciary. Wouldn't you agree? The trap was set. By the time Sarah Bennett entered his courtroom, she would face not only fabricated legal charges, but also professional pressure. Judge Matthews would ensure she regretted ever speaking out against him. The Lincoln High faculty meeting was concluding when Principal Davidson asked Sarah to stay behind. His expression was uncharacteristically grave as the other teachers filed out. Sarah, I received a troubling call from the superintendent yesterday. He removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose. Apparently, you've been involved in some sort of legal trouble. Sarah's confusion was genuine. Legal trouble? You mean my traffic ticket? I've already paid that online. Well, that's not what I was told. Davidson slid a paper across the desk. The superintendent mentioned a summons for failure to appear and contempt of court. Judge Matthews personally expressed concerns about having, how did he phrase it? Educators who disrespect legal institutions. Sarah stared at the paper, her mind racing. This makes no sense. I paid the ticket immediately. I have the receipt. I hope so, Davidson replied, his tone making it clear he was caught in the middle. Because the superintendent hinted that this could become a contract review issue if it escalates. A cold realization washed over Sarah. This is about the town hall meeting, isn't it? The principal's silence spoke volumes. Later that day, Sarah found an official court notice in her mailbox. Unlike the automated traffic ticket she'd received weeks ago, this one detailed charges of failure to appear for a scheduled hearing and contempt of court for disregarding judicial summons. It required her appearance before Judge Harrison Matthews in 3 days. Her hands trembling slightly, Sarah called the court clerk's office. "I'm sorry, Ms. Bennett, but our records show you were notified to appear last Friday regarding your traffic violation," the clerk explained impatiently. "When you failed to appear, Judge Matthews issued the contempt citation." "But I never received any notification about appearing in court," Sarah insisted. "I paid the fine online. I have the confirmation number right here. The system shows the payment was processed but flagged for court appearance due to, let me see, irregular processing," the clerk replied. "You'll need to address this with the judge directly." That evening, Sarah pulled a weathered box from her closet, her grandfather's case files and legal notebooks. Next, she retrieved her laptop and began researching Judge Harrison Matthews' career history. Article after article painted a disturbing picture of a judge whose rulings consistently favored certain developers and business interests. The same names appeared repeatedly in cases he presided over. Most interestingly, in the 7 years he'd been on the bench, not a single complaint against him had progressed past the initial filing stage. Sarah's phone rang. It was Rebecca from school. "Sarah, something strange is happening. Davidson was asking everyone about your classroom conduct. Whether you discuss political topics with students. What's going on?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "It seems Judge Matthews doesn't appreciate criticism." As she hung up, Sarah noticed her hands had stopped trembling. The initial shock was replaced by something else. A cool, analytical clarity she hadn't felt since law school. Judge Matthews had made a critical error. He'd chosen the wrong teacher to intimidate. "Two can play this game," she whispered, opening her grandfather's leather-bound copy of Judicial Ethics and Misconduct. Sarah sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by stacks of printouts, legal textbooks, and her laptop. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun as she circled patterns in Judge Matthews' case history. "It's not just me," she murmured, connecting the dots. Matthews had a history of using minor infractions to pursue personal vendettas. 3 years ago, a journalist who'd written a critical piece about him suddenly faced audit issues. Last year, an attorney who challenged his ruling found himself battling spurious bar complaints. The pattern was clear but subtle enough that most people simply paid fines or apologized rather than fight back. Matthews was careful never to overreach too dramatically with any single case. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Davidson asked to observe your class tomorrow. Something about curriculum review." The pressure tactics were escalating. Sarah paced her apartment, legal strategies forming and dissolving in her mind. Fighting directly might protect her integrity, but could cost her job. Capitulating would mean allowing an abuse of power to continue unchallenged. Her eyes fell on a framed photo of her grandfather on her bookshelf. "What would you do?" she asked the smiling image. She picked up her grandfather's old journal, filled with notes from cases he'd worked decades ago. A yellowed newspaper clipping fell out. Her grandfather standing with a group of community members who had successfully challenged a corrupt local official. "You don't fight power with power," she remembered him saying. "You fight it with preparation and truth." That night, Sarah made 3 crucial phone calls. The first was to an old law school classmate now working at the State Bar Association. The second was to a former student who'd become an investigative journalist. The third was to the court, leaving a message that she would represent herself at the hearing. The next morning, Sarah taught her class with unwavering focus, despite Principal Davidson observing from the back row. She noticed him taking notes when she discussed the theme of moral courage in To Kill a Mockingbird. After class, Davidson approached her desk. "Sarah, about this court situation, maybe you should just apologize to Judge Matthews. These things can escalate unnecessarily." Sarah smiled politely. "I appreciate your concern, but I believe in modeling integrity for our students. Sometimes standing up for what's right means facing uncomfortable situations." As Davidson left, Sarah slipped a small digital recorder into her purse and reviewed her notes for the 100th time. Judge Matthews thought he was setting a trap for an uninformed teacher who'd stepped out of line. Instead, he was about to face someone who understood the law far better than he realized, and who had nothing to lose. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation. Sarah took personal leave from school, claiming she needed to consult with an attorney, which wasn't entirely untrue, though she was both client and counsel in this scenario. In the county law library, Sarah pored over judicial conduct precedents and procedural rules. The elderly librarian, Mrs. Hamilton, recognized her focus. "Been a while since I've seen someone research so thoroughly," she remarked, helping Sarah locate a specific volume on contempt proceedings. "Most folks just Google these days." Sarah smiled. "My grandfather always said real legal research happens in actual books, not search engines." Mrs. Hamilton studied her curiously. "You're not a practicing attorney, are you? I know most of the local bar." "No, just a teacher with a legal background," Sarah replied, "and a situation that requires attention to detail." Later, at the courthouse public records office, Sarah requested transcripts from Judge Matthews' previous contempt cases. The clerk seemed surprised by the specificity of her request. "These are unusual requests for someone representing themselves," the clerk commented, eyeing the stack of transcripts. Sarah nodded. "I believe in being thorough." Back home, Sarah created a detailed timeline. The original traffic citation, her online payment with confirmation number, the dates of supposed notifications she'd never received, and the town hall meeting where she criticized the judge's ruling. The connection was circumstantial but suggestive. Her phone rang. It was Michael Chen, her former student now working at the local newspaper. "Ms. Bennett, I did some digging like you asked. Judge Matthews has quite the interesting pattern with contempt charges. They've increased 400% since he took the bench, mostly against people who've opposed him publicly. Nothing big enough to trigger oversight, but definitely unusual." "Can you get me the names of others he's targeted?" Sarah asked. "Already compiled a list. Emailing it now. But Ms. Bennett, be careful. Matthews has serious connections with the county executive and half the school board." That evening, Sarah carefully selected her outfit for court, a simple burgundy sweater over black slacks. Professional but understated, no power suit that might telegraph her legal background. The element of surprise remained her greatest advantage. She practiced her arguments in front of her bathroom mirror, careful to strike the right tone, respectful but firm, knowledgeable but not overtly legal in her language. Judge Matthews would expect a nervous teacher intimidated by the courtroom and legal jargon. Sarah packed her grandfather's worn leather briefcase with meticulously organized evidence. Payment confirmations, citations, procedural rules, and relevant cases. Between two legal pads, she slipped a sealed envelope containing information she hoped wouldn't be necessary, but had prepared nevertheless. "The best weapon in a courtroom," a grandfather used to say, "is being more prepared than everyone else thinks you need to be." As she finally went to bed, Sarah felt strangely calm. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about defending herself against fabricated charges. It would be about standing up against the abuse of power, exactly what she taught her students literature often illustrated. Win or lose, she would face Judge Matthews on her terms, not his. The municipal courthouse bustled with morning activity, harried attorneys shuffling papers, clerks calling names, anxious defendants waiting for their fate to be decided. Sarah sat quietly in the back row, observing Judge Matthews' handling of other cases before hers. His pattern was consistent: brusque with defendants, deferential to prosecutors, impatient with explanations. He rendered judgments quickly, rarely referring to actual statutes. Most concerning to Sarah was how frequently he interrupted self-represented individuals before they could complete their arguments. Sarah noticed Gregory, the clerk she'd spoken with on the phone, avoiding eye contact with defendants. He seemed uncomfortable, especially when the judge issued particularly harsh rulings. Docket number 47B, Bennett Sarah. Failure to appear and contempt of court, Gregory finally called. Sarah approached the defendant's table, feeling eyes on her as she placed her grandfather's briefcase down. Judge Matthews barely looked up from her file, his expression one of practiced disinterest. "Ms. Bennett," he began, his tone condescending, "you're charged with failing to appear for a scheduled court hearing regarding traffic violation TOR 2024-5892, and subsequent contempt for disregarding a judicial summons. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding I'd like to clarify." Matthew's eyebrow raised slightly. "The facts seem quite clear, Ms. Bennett. You were notified to appear on October 15th regarding your citation. When you failed to appear, this court issued a contempt citation, which brings us to today." "If I may, Your Honor," Sarah began, "I never received any notification to appear on October 15th. I received a traffic citation on October 1st, which I paid online on October 3rd. I have the confirmation receipt here." She slid the printed confirmation across to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. Matthews glanced at it dismissively. "Payment doesn't excuse a required appearance, Ms. Bennett. The citation clearly indicated a court date was necessary." "With respect, Your Honor, it did not." Sarah produced the original citation. "You'll see there's no court date indicated anywhere on the form, and the online payment portal showed the matter was resolved upon payment." A flicker of annoyance crossed the judge's face. "Ms. Bennett, perhaps in your English classes you're used to having the final word. In my courtroom, I determine what constitutes proper notification and appropriate response." The condescension in his tone was evident to everyone present. Several attorneys exchanged glances. "I understand, Your Honor," Sarah replied calmly. "However, I believe procedural due process requires actual notice before contempt can be found. Could the court perhaps produce a copy of the appearance notification I allegedly received?" Matthew's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This was not going as he had planned. The simple teacher was supposed to be intimidated, apologetic, easy to dismiss. "Proceed with caution, Miss Bennett," he warned. "Challenging this court's procedures only compounds your contempt." Judge Matthews leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. The courtroom had grown unusually quiet, other attorneys pausing their conversations to watch the exchange. "Miss Bennett, let me be clear," Matthews said, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "This court's records indicate proper notification was sent. Your failure to receive it does not constitute a defense." Sarah remained composed. "I understand, Your Honor. Would it be possible to see the proof of service for that notification?" The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Gregory, please provide Ms. Bennett with the standard notification record." The clerk shuffled nervously through the file before producing a form. Sarah reviewed it carefully. "Your Honor, this form is dated October 10th, but it's not signed by any process server, nor is there a certified mail receipt. There's actually no evidence this was ever sent." A muscle twitched in Matthew's jaw. "Ms. Bennett, Are you suggesting court officials fabricated records? Not at all, Your Honor. I'm simply noting that the procedural requirements for service haven't been documented according to Municipal Court Rule 7.3, which requires proof of actual delivery for contempt proceedings. The judge's expression darkened. Several observers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Bennett, your amateur legal analysis is trying my patience. You clearly have a problem with authority, as evidenced by your inappropriate comments at the town hall meeting last month. Perhaps that's the real issue here. There it was, the connection Sarah had been waiting for him to make publicly. She noticed a young reporter in the back row scribbling notes furiously. I wasn't aware my constitutionally protected speech at a public forum was relevant to a traffic citation, Your Honor, Sarah replied, her tone respectful but firm. Matthew's face flushed slightly. Your attitude is precisely the problem. This court finds you in contempt for failing to appear as directed. You're fined $2,000 and sentenced to 40 hours of community service. He banged his gavel with finality, clearly expecting that to end the matter. Your Honor, Sarah said calmly, I'd like to make a motion. This matter is concluded, Ms. Bennett, Matthews snapped. A motion for judicial recusal is always timely, Your Honor, Sarah continued. Under Judicial Conduct Rule 2.11, a judge shall recuse himself when his impartiality might reasonably be questioned. The courtroom fell completely silent. Judge Matthews stared at Sarah, momentarily speechless, as he realized this was no ordinary defendant. On what possible grounds? He finally managed. Sarah opened her briefcase. I'd be happy to explain, Your Honor. Sarah stood perfectly straight, hands resting lightly on her grandfather's briefcase. The courtroom remained utterly silent, all eyes fixed on the unassuming teacher who had just challenged one of the most powerful men in the county. Your Honor, Sarah began, her voice clear and measured, I move for your recusal on 3 grounds. She withdrew a neatly organized folder. First, there's a clear appearance of bias. You just explicitly connected these proceedings to my protected speech at a town hall meeting, suggesting this case is retaliatory in nature. Judge Matthews' face darkened. Ms. Bennett, you're treading on dangerous ground. Second, Sarah continued, undeterred, there are significant procedural irregularities that suggest this matter was handled outside normal protocols. She produced a printout from the court's online system. The original citation was marked paid, resolved in the system on October 3rd. Yet somehow, on October 9th, after the town hall meeting where I criticized Your Honor's ruling, the status was manually changed to appearance required without notification to me. Sarah turned slightly, making sure her words reached the entire courtroom. I submitted a public records request that shows this is the only traffic citation in the past year to have its status changed after payment was accepted. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The court reporter's fingers flew across her stenotype machine. Furthermore, Sarah said, reaching into her briefcase again, I've documented 7 other cases where individuals who publicly disagreed with Your Honor subsequently faced unusual contempt proceedings or procedural penalties. Judge Matthews slammed his gavel. That's enough. This is contemptuous behavior. Which brings me to my third point, Sarah said, her voice somehow both respectful and resolute. Judicial Canon 2.2 requires that a judge shall not permit family, social, political, financial, or other interests or relationships to influence the judge's judicial conduct or judgment. She removed the sealed envelope she had prepared. If Your Honor won't recuse himself, I'm prepared to file a formal complaint with the Judicial Conduct Committee, including documentation of a pattern of using contempt powers against critics, evidence of procedural irregularities in multiple cases, and testimony from 3 other defendants who experienced similar treatment after publicly disagreeing with Your Honor. The courtroom had gone from silence to a low buzz of astonished whispers. Several attorneys were frantically taking notes. The young reporter in the back had stopped writing entirely, his mouth slightly agape. Judge Matthews' face had gone from red to ashen. "Miss Bennet," he said, his voice noticeably strained, "where exactly did you acquire your legal knowledge?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Before I found my calling as a literature teacher, I graduated summa cum laude from Columbia Law School, Your Honor. While I chose not to practice, I've maintained my legal education. My grandfather always said, 'Knowledge of the law is every citizen's best protection against its abuse.'" She placed her hands flat on the table. "I'd like the record to reflect that I submitted evidence showing procedural irregularities, documentation of a pattern suggesting bias, and formally move for recusal. If denied, I'm prepared to appeal immediately under the collateral order doctrine, which allows interlocutory appeal of recusal denials, as established in Hampton v. County Court." Judge Matthews stared at Sarah, the realization dawning that his simple intimidation tactic had backfired catastrophically. The simple teacher had not only recognized his trap, but had set one of her own, and he had walked right into it. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Judge Matthews stared at Sarah before announcing a 15-minute recess. Behind closed doors, the judge's demeanor had changed completely. "What exactly do you want, Miss Bennet?" he asked, his earlier arrogance replaced with controlled anger. "Justice," Sarah replied steadily. "Dismissal of these fabricated charges, notation they were dismissed with prejudice, and your recusal from any matters involving me or Lincoln High." She also presented a list of 7 similar cases deserving review. Upon returning to court, Matthews announced in a clipped voice that all charges were dismissed with prejudice, and he recused himself from future matters involving her to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Outside, a reporter approached. "Miss Bennet, would you comment on what happened?" Sarah smiled. "Our justice system works best when everyone understands their rights, including judges." Epilogue 2 weeks later, Sarah discussed To Kill a Mockingbird with her class when Principal Davidson and Superintendent Morris entered. After class, Davidson approached. "I owe you an apology. I should have supported you." "You were in a difficult position," Sarah replied graciously. "Things have changed," the superintendent added. "Judge Matthews has taken a leave of absence, and our funding has been restored." That evening, Sarah found her grandfather's restored law school photo with a note from her admiring students. "Thank you for teaching us that standing up for what's right matters." She smiled, running her fingers over his law books. Perhaps education truly was the path to justice. After all, knowledge was power, and courage was what made that power meaningful. Based on true events demonstrating that justice can prevail when ordinary citizens stand up against abuse of power.